The Westpac Melbourne Institute Consumer Sentiment Index for April jumped by 9.4%. It's now up to 85.8. So at 85.8, it's still very low. And it's indicating that our view that the consumer spending will remain lacklustre in 2023 and through the first half of 2024. Still consistent with that. But at least I think we've seen the bottom now in consumer sentiment. Now, why did consumer sentiment lift so quickly? Obviously, I believe it's been due to the fact that the Reserve Bank went on hold with regard to their interest rate policy. So after 10 consecutive increases in interest rates, the Reserve Bank paused at the April meeting, and that's been received very positively. If we look back through history, the most comparable period was 2009, 2010. So between October 2009 and May 2010, the Reserve Bank raised rates every meeting with the exception of February. So that was 6 meetings that they raised rates. We eventually saw a very positive response there as well, an increase of about 11%, even though the first month consumers were still sceptical. Confidence fell by 5, but in the next month there was a lift to 11 when they thought that the pause could be sustained. Some other evidence around this was that confidence amongst those folks with a mortgage boomed by 12.2%. We also asked respondents how they see the outlook for interest rates. Last month, 45% of them saw rates going up by more than 1% over the next 12 months. Now this ratio is down to around 31%. That's still a fairly high proportion. Now, it's indicative that consumers are still somewhat cautious about the interest rate environment. In terms of the components of the index, there were some very strong results. How people see their finances over the next 12 months, up by 12%. How they compare their current finances with a year ago, up by 10%. And even the question about is now a good time to buy a major household item, which has been quite disturbing for us in the last few months, lifted by 9.5%. But that component is still 1% less than the low point in that component during the deep recession of the early 1990s. So it's still signalling that consumers' plans for spending on major items is very, very weak indeed. One of the reasons why spending has held up relatively well during 2022, despite the very weak consumer sentiment, has been confidence in the labour market. So once again, we saw the Westpac Melbourne Institute index of unemployment expectations improve by 3.3%. But if I look at it over the last 6 months, it's deteriorated by around 6.8%. And I think the answer there is that, yes, it still remains relatively robust, but there is definite evidence of a gradual deterioration in people's confidence about the labour market. Where there hasn't been a deterioration has been in confidence about the housing market. So the question is now a good time to buy a dwelling, lifted by over 8%, but it's now really only back to that range between 70 and 80 that we've seen for most of the last 12 months. And bear in mind that at the moment, even with that 8% plus jump, it's still 46% lower than the peak that we saw back in November 2020. But the result that probably stood out the most in terms of this survey has been the Westpac Melbourne Institute Index of House Price Expectations. So over the month, that index lifted by 16.7%. It is now only about 2% below the level that it achieved just before the beginning of the tightening cycle. And it's 43% above the level of the so-called low point in this cycle back in November. So this is indicating that people are becoming quite confident about the outlook for house prices, and we've started to see evidence around that particular trend in other data with regard to the house price indexes of various survey businesses. So what does all this mean for interest rates? Well, we're very confident that the Reserve Bank would pause at the April board meeting. Less confident that they'll do the same in May, because in May they're going to have more information available, a much better read on underlying inflation. They'll have to digest some of this information around this recovery in the housing market, the surge that we've seen from immigration, and of course the very dismal performance in productivity which makes the link between wages growth and inflation that much tighter. So we think that the case is still there for the Reserve Bank to raise the cash rate by 25 basis points at the May meeting, but there's a lot of data between now and the meeting that may well indicate that the pause will continue. Certainly at this stage, our view is that there will be another hike in May. Thank you very much.